Well, certainly, as I mentioned before, you've had some amazing success with your trends forecasts in the past, and I invite my listeners to go check those out at trendsresearch.com to find out more about the Trends Research Institute and what you do. But recently you've been making headlines with your latest predictions of the collapse of '09 and the Greatest Depression. So tell us exactly what it is you see transpiring over the next 3 years.
Well, the next shoe to drop in the real estate sector is going to be commercial. We're looking at what's going on in the retail sector with all these vacancies. Who's going to rent them? The answer is no one. Retail sales continue to soften. We start seeing more and more store closings. And you're going to see more bankruptcies, just like we saw in '08. We're going to see more in '09. So that's only in the retail sector. Then you look at the commercial sector of real estate and all of the office buildings that are not going to be utilized. They're going to start seeing vacancy rates increase probably to 25-30% rates. And the answer becomes, who's going to rent all this vacant office space? The answer is no one. So that sector is much more leveraged, for example, than the so-called subprime problem. We're talking about companies that put maybe $60 million down and leverage $6 billion. And that's where the big crash is going to come. Following that, we're going to go into what we're calling the Greatest Depression. And we're saying it's worse than the Great Depression because back then in the 30s, people didn't own homes. Most people didn't own homes. There was no such thing as credit cards. The American consumer was in $14 trillion in debt. We had trade surpluses. Now we're $700 billion in the hole each year. We had balanced budgets. Now, of course, with all these bailouts and stimulus programs, we're probably up to about $13 trillion a year in deficit. And back then, most importantly, we were a manufacturing country. We manufactured our way out of the Great Depression at the onset of World War II. We no longer have that capacity. Plus, we're an underdeveloping nation. Back then, this one is an ascending society. Now it's a descending one in many, many different categories. We no longer win, place, or show when it comes to health, education, quality of life, according to OECD data. And you look what's going on in major cities and high schools. You're lucky to graduate 50% of these kids. So we're a descending society at a time when the economy is failing. And so again, nobody could predict the future, and there are always wild cards that are thrown on the deck that you can't anticipate. So now with all of this stimulus thrown onto the deck, the slowdown, the depression is going to be stalled a bit. There's no question about it. I mean, you throw trillions into the economy, it's going to, like taking a drug to cure a chronic degenerative disease. It doesn't cure it, but what it does is that it alleviates the symptoms. So we're going to see some kind of financial symptom relief, but the depression is well set in, it's chronic, and it's going to be a killer.
Well, certainly the forecast that you're making there and the trends that you're pointing out in terms of the descending American society is one that's based on thousands of data points and much hard research. But when the hottest selling retail items in the U.S. are guns and ammunition, and the hottest trend is starting a recession garden in your backyard, it's pretty easy to read the writing on the wall at that point. So to what extent do you take this as an organic confirmation of the growing sentiment of unrest that you've predicted? And to what extent do you think this is even a hopeful sign that people are intuitively sensing the coming crisis and attempting to prepare themselves by taking their family's safety and well-being into their own hands?
Well, I'm a close combat practitioner. I train with John Perkins at TACproof.com and have been a close combat martial artist for over a quarter of a century. So we plan for the worst. When you plan for the worst, for survival, in the case of a worst-case scenario, you have room to push back from that. If you're only hoping for the best and something a lot worse than the best happens, you have no room. So we see it as an encouraging sign that people are taking the future into their own hands and not relying on anyone. Unfortunately, what's holding us back is that the government is becoming more and more of a big brother. There's a lot of debate now, James, as whether or not these stimulus package, rescue plans, and bailout schemes are turning the country into a socialistic country. They talk about nationalism. By definition, state-controlled capitalism is called fascism. And so what happens in this kind of environment is that creativity and innovation are stifled. So we have the force that necessity is the mother of invention, but then we have a greater force or an equal force against it, in that this mantra of too big to fail is pushing down the entrepreneur and the free spirit and taking so much of the resources and regenerating them into an area that does not bring about the innovation and growth concepts that really pay off in the long run. And you mentioned about what you call recession gardens. Is that what you call them?
I've heard them called many things recently, but recession gardens is one of them.
Well, back in our top trends for 2009, we had predicted that this was going to happen in 2008, and we called them bush gardens as a joke, and that people would remember that we had this president in there that, and of course he's not responsible. They all are. You go back to the Clinton administration, they're the ones that deregulated the economy, Glass-Steagall Act, the Banking Act, and allowed all these derivatives and these games to be played. But we joked about it, and that we're going to see more and more of this. People are going to start becoming more self-sufficient, and it's only the intelligent thing to do. And this concept that they're going to free up lending so people could borrow more, I mean, this is what got us into it. So, we are hopeful in the sense that when people start regaining their dignity and self-respect and planning their own futures without looking for someone else to do it, we have a better future in sight.
Well, picking up on your close combat expertise, which you mentioned earlier, I came across an interesting quotation of yours that, quote, "The first rule of close combat is to attack the attacker. Action is faster than reaction. The same holds true for the future. You know the future is coming. Attack it before it attacks you." End quote. So, on that note, what exactly does it mean to attack the future, and how does one go about doing that?
Well, with close combat, you use your senses. And if you feel you have to attack, you do. You ask questions later. And it's the same thing now with the economy. We firmly believe that you cannot print money based on nothing without creating a hyperinflation scenario. So, for example, speaking only for myself, because we do not provide financial advice, we're trend forecasters, I buy gold. Now, I know that gold is taking quite a hit these days compared to where it was. It's down to the 900 level now, in the belief that the worst is over. We don't believe the worst is over. We don't even think the worst has yet begun. So those are the kind of measures that we take. You mentioned about gun sales. It's a time to consider those kind of things. I'm a firm believer in Second Amendment rights. The other aspects are, if you have a child in college and you cannot afford it, and they're going to be going deep in debt, do they really need to get that master's degree in public administration, the undergraduate in journalism and communications or business administration? Are they really that necessary? I mean, they have to get a degree in art history. So unless they're going to college to get a return on investment, really consider twice in taking proactive strategies rather than waiting for the worst to come and then be stuck with a lot of debt and a dead-end job. Because what are you going to do with that degree? They're looking at advanced numbers now coming out in February, March unemployment. We're looking, the initial reports are coming out, are looking at about 750,000 new people lost their jobs. So these are the kind of proactive strategies to consider. Don't spend an extra penny that you don't have to. That doesn't mean you can't live, but live well. Only buy quality, buy smaller amounts. And by the way, those are the businesses that are going to thrive. Average is not going to make it during the Greatest Depression. Quality is the best of the best.